All right, I think we can get started. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time. My name is Jeff Kubiak. I'm a professor of practice here at ASU, where I serve as the director of the Future Security Education in ASU's Future Security Initiative. Some of the educational offerings that I help guide include the MA in Global Security, the MAGS, which, as most of you know now, has a non-technical concentration in cybersecurity and a concentration in irregular warfare. We're also generating a new concentration to be launching fall of 26 in intelligence studies. We also offer a graduate certificate in global security and competitive statecraft for those who are interested in something short of an MA. And we're also building a new portfolio of short courses on similar topics to be offered in our career and professional development and educational outlet called Career Catalyst. These events I generally schedule to highlight the thought-leading faculty that teach in our programs, but today we're going a different way. We're exploring some new educational opportunities that ASU and other folks have explored, and we've invited guests from a company called Valens Gaming to talk to us about gaming and the role gaming can play in an educational opportunity. Looking forward to potentially engaging them to help us with our capstone program, but that's a discussion for the future. Today, David Gartenstein-Ross and Eleanor Ross, we're going to discuss with us this idea of immersive gaming. David and Eleanor, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate if you would give us just a little bit of background on your company, who you are, how you got into it real quickly, and then I know you've got a presentation. After the presentation, we're going to we'll let the attendees engage in the question and answer. I'll moderate that through the question and answer block in Zoom. So David and Eleanor, thank you again for coming, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeff. I'm David Gartenstein-Ross. I'm the founder and CEO of Valens Games, and proud to have Eleanor Ross, no relation, who is the director of game design here with me. Valens Games is a young company. We've been around just a little under 10 months, our 10-month anniversary being 4 days from now. And I'm really proud of what we've been able to accomplish in that period. I did found another company with a very similar name, Valens Global, which I exited from last year and originally incubated our gaming practice within that other company. There are two different ideas that Valens Games brings to bear. The first one, which we're going to talk about today, is the immersive exercise style of game. And Eleanor, if you'd like to start screen sharing, we can get the PowerPoint up, because I know we're going to begin that momentarily. The immersive exercise style of game is very distinctive, and we're proud of it. And we think that it does very unique things, especially as a device for training, for education, and also for analysis. The second thing that we bring to bear, which I know Eleanor and I will also talk about, and we'll draw Jeff back in for that, is our Providence platform. It's a platform for game design, which will design games the same way that Eleanor or I would. And what it's able to do is, in 6 minutes or less, based on guiding the user through a series of basic prompts, will produce a game that is fully playable. I think that it's really cool, and what it's able to do is significantly reduce the amount of time that it takes to design a game. It addresses both of the major barriers to people using games in education and training and the like. Those barriers being a lot of people don't have the expertise to do so, and the second barrier being that it often takes a lot of time. And before I turn to Eleanor, I'll provide a couple of things. My own background before I got into games is as a subject matter expert and a scholar working on violent non-state actor issues, terrorist groups, and the like. I had about a 2-decade career in that field with a variety of interesting things I got to do, ranging from being the lead drafter of DHS's first counterterrorism strategy, which was released in 2019, and I'm still very proud of, to being able to work on live hostage negotiations, serving as an expert witness in major federal cases. And just two days ago, I was privileged to testify before Congress in the very first hearing held by the Homeland Security Committee's Subcommittee on Counterterrorism and Intelligence. Part of what I did during this period was taught at the university level, including at Duke University, and that's where Eleanor comes into this story. I met Eleanor in the spring semester of 2024 when she was one of my students at Duke, and was struck by the talent that she had and the passion for the topic, and ultimately hired her for the new company that I was standing up, Valens Games. She's risen through the ranks very quickly, And as I said, today is the director of game design. And I'll say one of the most talented game designers with whom I've ever had the privilege of working. Eleanor, over to you.
Oh, thanks, David. Those are some really kind words. I will completely agree with what David said here, not about me being amazing. That was really nice to hear, but about what our company does and what the style of gaming we've created is. So just a little more background on me really quickly. Before I decided to kind of shift into education and training, I was planning to go more of the national security route, specifically, maybe government, nonprofit sector. I was a born scholar. I spent about a year in Senegal, a year in Morocco, and was really excited to kind of enter that area of the world. And then my senior year at Duke, I decided to take a class, a national security simulation with David. And after the first class, I walked up to him and said, "How can I get involved? This is amazing." It was to be like blunt about it, the best learning experience I ever had. It had put all those ideas and things I had learned in other classes and was still learning in that class into practice. I always say like it puts like theory into practice. So it was a class on white nationalism, terrorism, extremism, and kind of like fault lines in society, whether that be Germany, California, like Guatemala is one of the places, and just different migration crises going on, different regulations having, and you actually have to deal with it then and there. And the spot research I had to learn, the fun I had, which I'm going to emphasize a lot throughout this talk, and just the skills I learned from like leadership to negotiation was something I hadn't experienced in any other course I'd have. So like I said, I walked up to David after the first class and said, "Can I please get involved?" I think this style of learning needs to be more ubiquitous. It needs to be seen by more people, whether in like national security level. We ran a game yesterday at the Stimson Center for professionals within the USG and also private companies, or, with individuals at universities like potentially ASU or Duke, Northwestern, Wheaton College, NDU, other places where we've worked with, where I find our style just to be really, really impactful. And so today we're going to be talking about the case for the immersive exercise approach to wargaming. So the style of game we talk about is called immersive exercise. We call them immersive exercises because they are immersive. We have newsfeed, social media, videos, memos. We even include videos from people that we call nerd famous. David, who are some people we've had videos of in past games?
So one of them is Max Brooks, who's the author of World War Z. Another one is Abdoueli Ali Gas, who'd been the prime minister of Somalia. Zach Beecham has been a repeated contributor. Zach is a journalist with Vox. Matt Duss, who was Bernie Sanders' foreign policy advisor, and Nancy Youssef from the Wall Street Journal would be 5 examples of people who range from quasi-famous to merely nerd famous.
And I think bringing this level of reality to games is something that makes our games tangible. So we have characters that are not real people, like we make them up, and then we have characters that are real people. And then one of the things we try to do, and we do well, I think, is we never make fun of anyone in our games. We have like quotes from Ben Shapiro. We mirror Ben Shapiro's style of writing. We have quotes from, Harris, Trump, Biden, all of the above, and we make a concerted effort to make sure that we're hitting the correct tones. For the characters we create, we do what we call deep world building. So our worlds are completely and fully alive. You look into a character, there's an entire backstory. We're going to get into, show little examples later of what our news feeds look like. But if I bring it all together, what it means is that when you're playing an immersive exercise style game, you're having a good time. You could be talking about topics as complex as, Syria, which David's going to talk about in a little bit, from, the game we ran yesterday on strategic competition with China, or, another game that we're going to show you a little bit about nuclear power, technological innovation, quantum computing, Bitcoin, and you'll still be having fun because we put effort into our games to make them enjoyable. And that's not just, a merely like, oh, you should have a fun time while you're playing a game. No, we really believe that one of the reasons people stick with our games and repeatedly say these are the best games they've ever experienced, war games, whether that's from, military to professionals to private sector to students, from whoever, it's because they're having a nice time, and lessons stick longer when you're having a good time. And I can, really attest to that because that's been my personal experience. So David, I'm going to throw it over to you because you're the one who, developed immersive exercises first. So why do you think traditional games fall short?
Traditional games can fall short for a variety of reasons. And let me pause for a second to say a kind word for traditional games, because I know ASU has a broad-based interest in wargaming, and we're not here really to cut anybody down. Instead, when Eleanor and I are looking at traditional games, there's a lot of things traditional games which use hexes and counters do very well, especially kinetic exercises. But when we're looking at where the world is in 2025, one of our core observations is that wars are won and lost away from the hexes and counters, meaning wars are won and lost away from what's happening on the battlefield. And often it's the information space, the diplomatic space, the cybersecurity space, and the like, where strategic competition is actually won or lost. The second thing is, in a lot of traditional games, people know what all the rules are. They'll often play to the rules. Oftentimes in our games, we keep the rules quite a bit hidden. People need to know how to make moves and the like, but they don't know how the outcomes of their moves will be tabulated. We think that's a positive thing in general, because when people know the rules, they play to the rules. When people don't know the rules, they play to the decisions. Those are a couple of things that we do a little bit differently. But then the final thing, for our games in particular, we think it's really important that there be an emotional impact to the game. That's where, as Eleanor mentioned, deep world building comes into play, the creation of characters, the use of humor. All of this triggers emotional investment because humans are interested in stories. And one of the most famous kind of game, which I think does not have a whole lot of legitimacy, though it does through another lens, is a nuclear weapons use game. This is something that's used for political science experiments. And the issue that I have with it in general, in addition to the fact that, for nuclear weapons use cases, it's such a small N. There have only been 2 use cases in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But the other issue with games of that sort is, without emotional investment, without people being grounded in a world, you're not really making a decision the way people would actually make a decision about nuclear weapons use cases. I could say more, but I know that we want to get to Q&A. So let's move on past traditional war games. And Eleanor, why don't you talk about how our games can be engaging? I know you want me to talk about Syria a little bit, so I'll have a word about that. And then I'll pass to you. But for Syria, this is one of the key use cases of where we think games can produce better outcomes. All of you obviously are aware of how Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian dictator, fell in late 2024. And it's a very complex situation with multiple factions on the ground, with different interests, not just Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, but also Kurdish factions like the YPG. You've had an Iranian presence for a while, even though it drew down. There's Hezbollah. You have Israeli forces on the ground. You have Druze forces, which recently captured a city in Syria. We can go on. It's an incredibly complex situation. As an analyst, as someone who worked analyzing counterterrorism issues for 2 decades, I've seen analysis often get things horribly wrong in situations like this. The prototypical example being the Arab Spring, where the way jihadist groups could adapt to that was very much underestimated. To me, games often provide a better way to think about situations like this, where there's multiple factions, multiple parties, and a complex set of things going on with indeterminate outcomes. Often it makes you see the realm of possibilities and think a lot more rigorously about what can happen. Eleanor, what would you like to add?
I honestly think you summed it up really well. I'm also being a little cognizant of time here. But I want to notice other places where we've seen games be really impactful. One was the Global Counterterrorism Forum. Another one, which personally is my favorite game we've developed, is called This Side of Paradise. It's a game about rare earth elements in East Africa. And It kind of engages, without going into too much details, because the game we prepared for DoD and we're about to deploy it. I'm really excited about that. It engages, the AOB, which includes like special forces, like PSYOP, and then partner nations, and also the US Embassy. So people are aware of the different actors on the ground and what levers they can pull. I think that's another thing that well-crafted games can do, is that they can prepare you for when crises actually occur. You can know who to contact and who to reach out to. Because if you have experts on the back end, so like when we were preparing this game, I reached out to a lot of individuals trying to make sure I understood all the levers and get all the understanding. So when we do play it, the players ask questions, and if they try to push a move through, they have to know the correct authorities to do so. So they're prepared when time comes, if that's need be. Back to you, David. I want to talk about best practices for games and futurism.
Yeah. So this section is called Gaming for the Future. I'm not going to spend much time on this, in part because I can reference a source here. And I get to shout out someone who I admire a lot, Madison Urban, who's a wonderful early career analyst who I had the privilege of working with at my first company, Valens Global. The Irregular Warfare Center, DoD's Irregular Warfare Center, which now has affiliation with ASU, published a study that we wrote in 2023 called Utopia or Oblivion. We took the title of the study from a Buckminster Fuller book, but we look at how can games help in understanding the future. And just to get to a few practices, some of our practices I mentioned before. One of the things that we think is helpful for the practice of futurism is games where you don't quite know how the rules will go down. It's helpful and then it makes people think a little bit more deeply, because when you think about it, the future is very indeterminate. Things are coming along all the time that completely change the rules that we're used to. Generative AI has just done that. Quantum computing is in the process of doing that. A few years ago, COVID did that. A lot of things rip up the rule set, and that can be helpful when thinking about the future. One of the futurists that we worked with in putting the study together is Jairus Grove at the University of Hawaii, someone else who I value a lot. And there's a few things we got from him, including in the previous slide, no need to go back, I'll just mention this point. He guided us on using methodologies for futurism. Jairus uses Jim Dator's Four Futures method, which is a really interesting way of conceptualizing the future. But the future isn't just a straight line accelerated. Indeed, the Four Futures method, that's one of the four futures one looks at, but there are multiple other scenarios, including collapse. Dator's view is that there are four and only four possibilities with respect to the future when you draw any trend line out. Finally, in terms of best practices for futurism, Matthew Urban and I argue that you should structure the game for maximum engagement. You should encourage realistic decision-making. Anyway, if you look at our arguments in Utopia or Oblivion, it matches up very well to the method of game design that we use for immersive exercises. So here's where we're going to go from now. Eleanor and I are going to walk through just a little bit of the look and feel of one of our games. So you get a sense of the media artifacts, the social media, the dark humor, the tone and tenor of one of our games. And then we're going to show you our Providence platform. I mentioned Providence before and the 6 minutes or less game creation. We're going to test that. And we're going to bring Jeff back on, and he's going to help guide us in creation of a game. But let's give them a little bit of a look, Eleanor, at one of the games that we have created.
Yeah. So this is a game called Arctic Awakenings. Super excited. We're going to be running it at Johns Hopkins University, not this Friday, but next. We recently ran it at Georgetown, and we ran it or a version of it at Georgetown, and we ran it at UNC for their Women in National Security program last month. This is my baby. I love this game with my whole heart. It has 5 teams, which are North Korea, China, Russia, Canada, and the US. And I might have referenced earlier, but it's a game about military development, nuclear power, quantum computing, soft power, and kind of just what the world may look like in 2030. What we like to do is we use these future methods and we look out and kind of test some ideas on what it could be. But the game in a whole is meant to pull out how people can negotiate, engage with each other, and think about things in new and novel ways. So welcome to Arctic Awakenings. This is the beginning of it. This is an article saying, from medical miracles to military monsters, the dual power of directed energy. So in this game, directed energy weapons are now almost fully advanced. There's a collaboration between Canada and the US that is pioneered through Rohan Champlain-Castry, who we'll get to in a moment, and NATERC, which is the North American Directed Energy Research Center. Its mission is to revolutionize life through directed energy technologies. Imagine vaporizing cancer cells with lasers, performing non-invasive surgeries, or beaming energy wirelessly across vast distances to power entire regions. Talks about NATERC, but also warns about what it could be. Here we have articles. We try to make our slides, as engaging as possible. So we talk about NATERC, and Rohan Champlain-Castry is a colorful character. If you hear Champlain, it's actually his great grandfather. He calls his G-cubed grandfather, God rest his soul, who discovered Quebec. And he, has that spirit of pro-Canada within him. And this sentiment actually kind of reflects what is going on right now about how the US sees Canada and how Canada sees the US. And so even though we developed this game, I think we started to develop it about 6 months ago, maybe a little more, before, what's going on now was going on. We find that often our game trends track through to what's going on. This is a timepiece on Rohan Champlain-Castry. Castry 1 finds a paradox. He's a man who despises poutine and speaks no French, yet is deeply committed to honoring his ancestors' legacy. Here we have Eternal Flame, which is North Korea has made a total 180, or I wouldn't actually say a total 180, maybe a 90-degree shift. They have not been fully successful in countering sanctions. Their work with Russia also hasn't been going too swimmingly, and so they've started a new initiative called Eternal Flame, which is actually taking the world by storm. Rebecca Black, I don't know if y'all remember Rebecca Black from her Friday song. She's a DJ now. She even translates one of their songs into English. And kind of this meme of Kim Jong-un is taking over. We've seen how memes of authoritarian figures are actually popular nowadays. Internet, like whatever you might see as an authoritarian figure from international standards. And so that is exactly what is happening here. The barber says, "What do you want?" Him, Kim Jong-un, barber, say no more. And so we have TikTok things, slides we talk about with the Pentagon, China's Russia obsession that no one cares about, and how NATERC is a worry and exciting to the people within, but no one in America really is paying any attention. What's going on in Beijing. And then we also have Agil Kadir. And David, do you wanna take him here and talk a little bit about Agil Kadir?
Sure. I think I'll explain this, and then we can go right into Providence. In fact, you could open up Providence now.
Yeah.
But I actually am not going to say too much about Agil Kadir here. The reason being that, as you know, Eleanor, we're actually having some great people from Arizona State join our game next Friday. So I don't want to give too many things away. But at any rate, Agil Kadir is the leader of a movement. She's someone who is very popular on Instagram. She's a fashion influencer, and she says she is a Uyghur refugee who was forced to work in a camp, or whose parents were forced to work at a camp to produce the minerals for directed energy weapons. Controversy ensues. A movement tries to get NATERC shut down, and that's one of the central plot points within the game. Welcome to Providence. I should specify that we haven't spent, right now we haven't spent basically anything at all on user interface or user experience. So it looks a little bit crude, but what's amazing is the AI. And we're about to do a major UI UX push. So this whole platform will look a lot cooler within the next, say, 5 to 6 months. But what it can do now is create a fully playable game, and that's what Eleanor is going to do. Jeff, would you like to rejoin us so that Eleanor can give you a look at this?
I'm here.
Hey. So we're gonna create a game together in 6 minutes or less. Sound good?
That sounds kind of amazing, actually.
Yeah, I'm super excited. And these are just some games I've created in the past. I always like glancing at them. one on the Napoleonic Wars, Trump's tariff war, Japan's longest game, which was about the last day of World War II and what was going on there, the future of AI in education. So just, what about McDonald's that we called the McRare, which was fun. But there's a whole variety of games you can create. And so this is the game creation wizard. So I know we spoke briefly before this chat about kind of what we were planning to do, but Jeff, did you give it any more thought, or what do we want the game to be about?
Well, I think the complexity of, I'm actually building a course right now that we're launching in the B session in the spring on what we're calling Cold War II. And so it's focusing on the US-Chinese security relationship. So that's kind of where I want to start that conversation. The trigger point, like Berlin would have been in Cold War I or Cuba, obviously is either the South China Sea and or Taiwan. So those are the focus areas. Those would be the triggers of real how Cold War II turns into potentially hot war, World War III. So that's I think the kind of scenario we like to start working through, because the number of stakeholders is tremendous, right? The complexity is it's global and really incomprehensible at a single look. So that's where I think immersive gaming might be most useful.
Okay. I like this. So to get a little more specific, I think, and we spoke about maybe there's an island nation in the South China Sea that both China and the US are kind of fighting for dominance over. Would that work?
Well, yeah. At some level that it's, one wants to unify, the other one wants to continue its independence as a democracy in the middle of the South China Sea.
Okay. Nation within the South China Sea. Perfect. And are there any more details you would like to add? So what is the central focus of the game world?
The central focus is honestly the complexity of the relationship between US and China. Right. So that's the overarching environment in which this conversation is going to take place.
And are there any vectors you would like to focus on? Often with our games, if you kind of, right now this is very broad, and so if you kind of focus on, do you want more political, more economic, more private sector, or kind of all of the above?
Yeah, I think we probably could go, it should be threefold: diplomatic, economic, and military. I think would be the focus of the specific scenario.
Perfect. And then are there any special rules or mechanisms that will shape this world? Any victory conditions? Do they win by cooperating? Do they win by having the island nation choose them? How do they win?
I think they win by returning to some form of stability and avoiding a hot war.
And then for the teams, we'll have China, US, maybe Russia.
Sure. You could bring in Australia,
Okay.
and then whoever the island nation is. Yep.
And then what kind of narrative style materials created would you like? Like kind of fun, exciting, high stakes, intense?
Yeah, I would go the last. High stakes intense. Yeah, that's.
And then any motif or theme to guide the game?
No.
Always skip a question. Maybe we'll just do fragility of civilization. Or we can just skip the question.
Yeah.
Skip question. Okay, and this is just saying how much action interface the players will have with the game world and how much you can control. We're just skipping it for now because we're just showing the platform off. How long the session lasts, how many turns, we'll just say 8. And then is there any name for the game you would like to have?
Cold War II.
I love that. Cold War II. And we'll name this world Jeff Spring.
Well, that'd be a lot scarier than this.
And so I just chose it. So how much time passes with each turn is 1 month. So what you'll see happening right here is the game is being created. We have like a proprietary platform on the back end made by our amazing engineering team that have kind of developed the software that puts together all the ideas that we just did, and we'll be spitting out a fully playable game. And I don't, David, when you tell me how long that took, I wasn't. Less than 6 minutes.
Less than 6, that's what matters.
Yeah, I would probably spend more time on the front end, having thought through some of the things that I would want this game to accomplish before I gave you my answers. But that said, off the top of my head, it'd be interesting to see what this thing comes up with.
No, I completely agree. And so this is kind of just a demo of like what the
Yeah,
platform do.
yeah. It's just, we can talk more about this in the question and answer, but while this thing's cranking, why do your customers come to you looking for games? What's their goal here in using wargaming in their either their kind of their understanding and or in their educational processes?
So I have a few ideas, but David, do you want to go first because you've been doing this a little longer than me?
You go ahead first. I'd love to let you take the first crack.
Yeah, sure. So I find that there are a few different reasons. One reason is they want to kind of game out the future and test out different strategies of what's going to happen. Here's Cold War II, so I'll just open it while I'm answering questions. This question. Another reason is they want to teach about something. So you didn't see it now, but in about a week, we'll be pushing out a new software where you can upload up to 1,000 pages of materials into the system. So hypothetically, instead of, I'm trying to think of like an example, maybe a book, whatever book, you could upload the entire book and say, create a game based off this book with these 5 teams that teaches the themes of this book. And so then players and students would be able to play out an entire game based on that. What we did at Wheaton University recently, or Wheaton College recently, was they were learning about leadership. And so we created a game on leadership and the different styles of leadership. And each team showcased, I think, David, it was a different style of leadership.
Yeah, the Professor Theon Hill built it around different styles they've been looking at. And so like the mob represented one style of leadership, honest cops represented a different style of leadership. It was really cool. And we didn't, wasn't able to look under the hood at the materials in his class. So I don't know the source reading that it came from. But I know that it was successful enough when he ran it that like multiple students posted about it on LinkedIn, including giving shout outs to Valens Games, which I always appreciate. That's a sign that something.
Yeah. And I'm happy to go more into kind of all the vectors I see, but I'll show the newsfeed now if that's something you'd be interested in.
Yeah.
So this is the newsfeed that's popping up. So the island nation's role in cooling the Cold War. So here we have, it's called, I guess, the Island Cooperative Nation, because we didn't give it a name. So a world teetering on the precipice of confrontation, a small yet formidable island cooperative nation emerged as an unlikely yet crucial harbinger of peace. As geopolitical tensions between the United States and China escalate in this second Cold War, the island nation's strategic location and reach resources position it as a pivotal player. In recent months, international diplomacy from the island nation has facilitated unprecedented dialogues. Its ability to navigate the minefield of competing interests lies not only in its geographic advantage, but its deep-rooted independence. The islanders, who are renowned for their pragmatic diplomacy, have wisely chosen the path of non-alignment, echoing the ethos of neutrality seen in Switzerland during past conflicts. This stance is not one of aloofness, but a strategic effort to offer a stage for necessary dialogue. Talks about how islanders are showing incredibly resilience and adaptability, and there's more civic engagement going on. Here we go about the immediate ramifications of the new Cold World. As the Cold War 2.0 unfolds, the immediacy of consequences are felt on multiple fronts. The PRC is aggressively pursuing economic expansion through the BRI. China aims to assert global leadership by intertwining the destinies of numerous nations through infrastructure and trade dependencies, comments Louis Zhang, an expert in international relations in Beijing. In response, the US bolsters its alliances under the banner of democracy and open trade. We have something from Senator Elizabeth Whitman saying, America thrives on partnerships that amplify not only our economic footprint, but also uphold cherished democratic value. It goes about to the human element, which is something I always find really important and sometimes not included in war games. This is something who's a local business owner in a key trade corridor on the island nation. He says, we want a future for our children that is secure and prosperous and not overshadowed by looming threats, Raj Patel says. going into the long-term ramifications. And here we have an interview with Dr. Elena Petrov, strategic analyst with the Russian Federation. Dr. Petrov, thank you for joining us. In the current climate of Cold War II, how does Russia view its relationship with China and the US? Thank you, Dr. Chen. We tread a delicate path of balancing alliances and maintaining independence in our own strategic decisions. With China, we see a partner in some areas, such as technology and trade, whereas with the United States, we experience both confrontation and cooperation, depending on the global issue at hand. It also produces, tweets. Justin, Chinese infrastructure projects are ramping up in Africa, while the BRI initiative continues to reshape global trade routes. Questions arise about long-term sovereignty. So it produces, a news feed kind of akin to what you saw us put into like more of a visual version. It also produces rules, a scene setter, talking about the structure of the game, the time range of it, the game dynamics and how it's going to go on. So this is all produced. Then it goes through team packets. So China gets a team packet, Australia, US, and these are the goals for China: expanding economic influence, maintaining domestic stability, projecting regional power. And as we saw during our themes, they are wanting to avoid direct conflict, but still at the same time achieve strategic advantage over the United States. And so throughout the game and through the use of this platform, whereas, previously you would need weeks or months to materials, it creates, I would say, 75 to 85% solution, especially if you put more time into, putting into answering the questions earlier on. And then throughout the game, what you can do is you can actually enter actions. So say like, obviously this will happen, but China invades Taiwan. And this could be an action from the China team. It would submit, it would show up over here. And then when I went to the next turn, new materials would automatically populate in the newsfeed, taking into account what happened previously. And so this allows games to be much more dynamic. That's another thing we do through like the Valens verse, what we call it. And with our Valens games is we try to continue making it so there's not hard boundaries on games, except what like subject matter experts have decided. Like Russia can't go and blow up the entire world in a game where Russia is working on, I don't know, agricultural production. That wouldn't make sense within that game context.
What sort of prep is required on the player's parts generally in advance of this? And again, I'm thinking through this as potentially a capstone course that's trying to synthesize the learning of 8 or 9 courses that students take in advance of this. And wanting to do some kind of head work before this game starts. Do we start with a scenario and give them something to work with from the scenario? Where does that go?
So the answer is that the game fits to your needs as opposed to you fitting to the game's needs. So we've run games that are all over the map in terms of this of the amount of prep work that's required. We talked about how Eleanor first met me when she was one of my students at Duke. For that class, there was a lot of prep work required to play it successfully. There was a fairly substantial news feed. So week after week, there'd be maybe somewhere between 60 to 90 pages of reading, a little bit more if you counted the spot research they'd have to do to be able to download successfully. Other games like Eleanor mentioned the Stimson Center game that we ran yesterday. For that one, we came in assuming that almost nobody would have read the read-ahead packets. We were correct about that. People did actually break them out during the game because, among other things, it talked about the various capabilities that could be brought to bear. But it was designed in such a way where we assumed that nobody would do anything. And so we had to just be able to launch into the game right away. Because and to be clear about that, it's because that's what we all do for think tank events, right? Like we all are familiar with think tank events as professionals. I don't do read aheads for think tank events. Like I'm not even aware when there are read aheads. So we weren't defending. You understand that that's the nature of a think tank event. There probably were a few people who'd read ahead of time and like big thumbs up to them. But generally speaking, you're not going to. And so the game has to adapt to that. So what you're talking about for a capstone, it would, if I were designing it, I'd probably design it in such a way that it assumed a baseline of familiarity with the readings from the 9 classes that go in. And like, even if not everybody takes all 9 classes, even if it's kind of a jagged route, because people are working in a team, they would have to reach out to one another to make sure they had the right baseline of knowledge. That's actually one of the things we really like about teams. It encourages sharing of ideas or sharing of.
Right.
Secondly, like again, as a capstone, you probably would want it to be a little bit more, a little bit more of a level of engagement. But to me, having been a national security professional, having understood, the value of spot research, for example, I mentioned, my drafting of DHS's first counterterrorism strategy. Even as a counterterrorism practitioner who'd had at that point about a decade and a half in the field, like there were so many things about DHS and its offices and components that I didn't know. Spot research was everything. And so things I try to make sure of is that the games encourage spot research, even spot research ahead of time. So we carefully design it in such a way that it's encouraging the right kind of research up front, but where it's really designed around the parameters of people who want the capstone, as opposed to us coming in and dictating. And that is very important, because I think games always need to adapt to the situation, whereas sometimes people think that they need to adapt to the game. My own view is the game needs to adapt to them.
Nice.
And really quickly, if I could just add, from it as a student experience, and then so I was a participant of a student at Duke University,
Right.
and then I actually helped teach the class this year. So it was really interesting to see it from both ends. The class was from 7:30 to 9 p.m. My team and that like last a year ago, and then the teams this year all stayed till midnight most nights, doing research on our own and just engaging with the materials. So I think this kind of learning experience pushes people to want to do more readings, actually, because you want your team to win. Humans naturally want to win. And in order to win, you need to know the most about your subject. And so people do extra reading materials, and that's helpful, I think, there.
Yeah. How easy is a game like this? And I'm going to let so anybody, there's a question in the Q&A. Let's see. Train diplomats. So do you see this type of strategy game being used to train diplomats, intelligence officers, IR students, or just create awareness in individuals? So what do you see? I mean, clearly there's a lot of use cases, if you will, for this sort of immersive gaming, especially. Where do you see the fundamental value here? Is it an education and training, or is it just kind of building skill sets within individuals?
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes and yes. We're saying yes and
Yeah.
yes.
It's all of the above. Our games have been used for all of those use cases.
Okay.
We've run our immersive exercise style games as capstones for the State Department's Foreign Service Institute, and we
Cool.
just got another really interesting opportunity to train diplomats of a European country that's still being developed, but we're very excited about that. It has been used to train intelligence officers. And one of the things that's really interesting that I found is that when you use the world building techniques that we do, different intelligence techniques actually work really well within the games. Even if the game hasn't been designed around that intelligence technique. So I've seen, for example, social network analysis be applied to our games, and actually with great effectiveness in uncovering different parts of the game that I didn't realize could be uncovered in this way. That's super interesting. And IR students, we've run this in multiple IR programs, and we can go on. But basically, the way Eleanor and I and the rest of the company sees the use cases, there's education, there's training being for professionals as opposed to education for students. There's analytic purposes. There's definite analytic insights you can get. Fourth, there's policy purposes, and our games have been used by the Global Counterterrorism Forum to fashion good practices documents, which GCTF is known for. What our games have done is allowed a more democratic conversation, so that within gameplay, you derive more insight from the standard seminar, where it's usually the speakers who are giving rise to good practices. A game allows multiple participants to give rise to good practices. And those are some of the key use cases. Two final ones I'll introduce. One is decision space for policymakers. And then a final one is risk sensitization. This is something we've done for a big US-based company, which featured kind of a new deployment coming up with some political sensitivities. And we walked them through a scenario which brought a lot of those risks to light. And I know that they're pleased with the way immersiveness was uniquely able to make their team understand some of the perils that could lie ahead.
That's excellent. Good question in the Q&A block here. Do you ever incorporate vulnerability discovery methodology as part of your exercise, or are they discussed in any of the after action reports?
Um, Let me see that. Vulnerability discovery methodology. I honestly am not familiar with vulnerability discovery methodology, but assuming that it's anything like what it sounds like, and I apologize for my lack of familiarity with it, if it is deals with just looking for vulnerabilities or looking for weaknesses that exist, we do that. I'm not familiar with every kind of structured technique that might be employed in a case. But Bill, I'd love to chat with you a little about that a little bit more, because it sounds, both interesting and very relevant.
This is another question about basically what games lie to explore, and this is actually this question actually hits at kind of why I'm really interested in this, because I did some time at the School of Advanced Military Studies. We taught a lot of course work on complexity and design, and complex systems has kind of really been a powerful lens for me to understand how things work, or how things, why things respond or don't respond the way we expect them to or don't expect them to. How much complexity can you explore in these games? It strikes me that because you're building a whole world in some sense, you're building the entire world. Can you get to a level of complexity in these games that you might not be able to get to in other settings, and understanding the opacity of cause and effect, multiple causes to a single effect, those sorts of things that I personally want students to see and understand as they're thinking through these kind of situations.
Yeah, I can start out because I know David has definitely an answer to this. I would say the thing about our games is they're always so complex that no one ever discovers everything. We always, like in our after action reviews, when we meet with companies or government or universities, we talk about like these are the other vectors, and they're like, oh, I never would have seen it that way, or I was unaware that it could kind of go down this path as well. So we integrate all the complexities, and the issue is, I would say there's a structured amount of time for games. So what I find is interesting is either on the whoever is holding the game will make sure that the teams playing are focused on what they want. Or what's often interesting is listening to what the teams find and what they're looking actively and they discover throughout, because that examining those complexities is something that often they've already thought a lot about, and they want specific examples of how they can do it. David, do you have anything else to add here?
Yeah, the thing I'd add, because this is an ongoing conversation with my colleague Derek Jones. He's a retired full bird colonel who runs Valens Global, which is a company that I founded, and was fortunate to be able to name Derek the next CEO. A lot of the work that he does as a strategist focuses on complexity versus things that are complicated, because Jeff mentioned, cause and effect and the like. And complexity tends to be areas where cause and effect is relatively vague. Not that there is no cause and effect, but that it's not apparent on the surface. One of the things that Derek fully believes is that good games in this style could actually replicate complexity in a way that's really difficult to do. Oftentimes, war games are merely complicated. I'd give a vehement answer, yes, to the complexity question, and say that not only is this really important, but it ties in also with some of the things that I mentioned before. So I mentioned how oftentimes we don't tell what the rules are, right? People know how to submit moves, but we don't always tell how we're going to adjudicate the moves.
Right.
Complexity, right? In a game in which you know exactly how every move is going to be determined, it can at best be complicated. But like all cause and effect is very obvious because you know exactly what's going to happen on the board, how dice are going to be rolled, and the like. I think that complexity is very important in the 21st century, and I do think that our games very uniquely are able to simulate complexity.
I'm gonna be a little bit selfish here, because I'm gonna take one of my colleagues, our mutual friends, ours, David, question from the chat, because this is really important to the potential for using this in our program. The question is, I'm curious about the ability to structure games for an online and asynchronous play. In other words, structured so that a turn can take a full week and people can weigh in up to a point before decisions are made. That's the key. Obviously, the discussions we've had at this point of games you have talked about, I am assuming, have all been essentially in-person games. The teams are all somewhere located geographically central. Is there a way to do this with a widely dispersed student body, team players who might, and then given some time to participate at various maybe asynchronous times?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually can share my screen again. I think it'd be helpful here. So one of the things beneficial, oh, my share screen is not working, so I won't do that. But one of the things you'll see on the Providence platform is you can share the actual interface with other players. And they can discuss and play offline. We actually often have that happen. People play and live throughout the country and actually across the world. We've had people playing in Europe, also playing with people in America, and they upload the information to the referee or to the system at different times, and the next turn isn't pushed out until everyone has submitted information. And if everyone doesn't submit information, then whatever has been submitted will be pushed out.
Go to
So it's absolutely, well, actually, that's what we're doing right now at Northwestern University. We're playing a game where it's 2 weeks per turn. And so they have 1 week to look at the materials and make a response. Usually teams submit near the deadline. So like some submit Wednesday, some Tuesday, some Thursday, and then they get the next materials a few days later after the professor has had time to look them over. Then they have a few days to look them over, about a week to look them over as a group and respond, and then the next material gets pushed out. So it's absolutely something that's been able to do asynchronous and at different timelines. And I think that's helpful too.
That's interesting, and a follow-up question from that same individual, and I appreciate him piping in here because we're getting good information, not just for me, because this information you and I can get in a private meeting, but I think it'll be some valuable to other attendees here. Is the idea of playing these games at different levels. Not everybody's at the strategic level. Some people can be, some more operational, or tactical, where others are operating at the strategic or policy levels, or even as a non-governmental or intergovernmental organizations. Those sorts of players. Can we play the game like that?
The answer is yes, absolutely. And our system is actually designed to do that. We've been in talks with a variety of other digital gaming companies. For example, had a conversation with Battle Road Digital, who are colleagues of ours and do more kinetic style games, about integrating the two systems. I think that it integrates very well with a kinetic system, and the answer is an enthusiastic yes. In part, like gaming always needs to be flexible, and I mean, I'll tell you kind of another area of integration that I did. One of my favorite games, because it's so different than most of the games that we normally run, was a sports leadership game focused on a Major League Baseball season in the future. Well, it's actually current Major League Baseball season, 2025, but like at the time we were running it, it was the future. And the game that we ran was like part sports leadership, and part of it was just overlaid on a baseball simulator. So part of it was just a straight up like baseball game, making manager style trades and doing other things that a GM's office would do. And to me, it was a really unique and interesting fusion of two different sets of capabilities. And so to me, you always want to do that, right? Like games are always flexible in such a way that you can integrate different things. And our system is designed to be integrated very easily into other forms of gameplay.
Yeah, and if I can just add one more thing really briefly, like I said earlier, it's not available yet, but in about a week or two, you'll be able to upload up to 1,000 pages of materials in the platform. And so you can have the entire syllabus. You could put all the syllabus, papers in there and include that in the creation of a game. So be like deliberately specific to what you're working on. So I think that's also helpful and like adds on to what David just said.
Yeah. That's intriguing. I am very intrigued, as clearly our audience members who have stuck around through this whole thing, which is fantastic. It's a really intriguing educational opportunity, I think, at so many levels. And I appreciate your enthusiasm, especially you, Eleanor. I mean, I know David been at this for a bit, but you've been at this for less time, but you're so taken by your experience as a student that you're doing this now. I think we probably could generate the same amount of energy from our student body. We have a very engaged student body who are very interested in these sorts of in obviously the course material, the material itself, but exercising it in such a fashion that you actually get to feel the complexity of the world that they're trying to enter as security professionals or moving up in as security professionals is really a particularly powerful powerful tool from my estimation. I'm not a gamer. I've never really enjoyed war games. I don't know why. I just never have. I understand them intellectually, and this is why I talk about these things kind of theoretically and intellectually, because I personally don't find them fun, but that's me. And I know in this case, in this situation, oftentimes I find myself in the minority because a lot of folks get very jazzed by this stuff. And I think it's great because it's an outstanding educational opportunity. I'll give you guys kind of a parting shot here, if you will. Oh, and here we go. How do I get involved? Nice. Yeah, that's what I want. We'll talk more from that student because I know he's a student. We can talk more going forward as we try to generate something around wargaming into the MAGS capstone. But parting shots from you, Eleanor, or David, as I'm going to end this at straight up an hour.
Sure. I'll give Shar the parting shot, but while I do so, Eleanor, maybe you could type our email addresses into the chat just so people know how to reach us. Normally we have that as the last slide.
Sure.
The main thing I'll say is I'll speak directly, Jeff, to what you said. Like for those of you who've tried games and haven't really loved them, I would just encourage you to try one of our games. And as I said at the outset, it's not to ping any other style of games. It's just we have something that's so different than what's out there. We're obviously really proud of what it is. And I think that there are different ways to do gaming. It's sort of like, to me, what I would say is if you'd watch TV in like the 1950s and you'd watch like the Honeymooners and you're like, yeah, I saw TV. I didn't really like it. And I haven't. I would encourage you to like maybe try Netflix or Amazon Prime or the like. And really, I would encourage those who've tried games before and just haven't loved them to just check ours out because it's very different. It goes to different purposes than a lot of them do. And we think it reflects the complexity of the 21st century. And we think it also engages the human mind in the way the human mind as a storytelling thing likes to be. So that's what my close would be, that not all games are the same.
Appreciate that. Eleanor, you get some final words for us.
I think David summed it up. The only thing I would add is kind of the student experience of that. I loved it so much, I started doing it professionally. And that, it's a way of learning that makes you remember. That's honestly what I struggled with in universities is you read so much, you read. Right. I was an Arabic major. And I'm reading Arabic, I'm discussing, and if I had to do a war game in Arabic, I would have gotten so much better faster. Like it's like I went and spent about a year in Morocco. My Arabic got so much better because I was there and I was living it, I was doing it. It's similar, it's the same brain analysis with a war game. You learn that theory in your classes, but it doesn't really click, or it didn't click for me at least.
Right.
Until I acted it out and was able to put those theories in practice.
I've been telling our capstone students since the beginning that the capstone was designed to do two things. One is to help them synthesize the course material into something that was useful, that stuck, right? They're going to reflect on the course material. They're going to reflect on these issues, think them through in a kind of holistic manner. That was what the capstone is supposed to do. That is supposed to be something that's both interesting and entertaining to them. So they pick topics that are interesting and entertaining to them, generally speaking. Now, clearly not everybody's going to be as creative, and that when the onus relies on them doing it, it's a little bit harder to do. But if somehow in some way we can present our students an opportunity to do something like this, I think we'd be coming a long ways. If there are any students, current MAGS students still in the audience, I don't recognize all the names, but if there are current MAGS students in the audience, please send me a note after this if this is something that you think might be useful to you as a current MAGS student to look forward to as you reach the capstone. We are going to we'll send out probably a survey to current students, just to see what kind of interest there might be, given what we know now, thanks to David and Eleanor's presentation. I appreciate you too. We have lots more to talk about. I think going forward, I think this is a fantastic opportunity. You guys are doing great work. You probably will get some, if you have job openings, my sense is you're going to get some applications as a result of this as well, because you've generated lots of enthusiasm in the crowd that attended, and I expect that's going to continue.
Thanks so much, Jeff. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much, both. Appreciate you. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk soon. Bye, everyone.